Welcome to Career Tools. Today's cast, the conclusion of our discussion on portable messaging basics. Here we go. Okay, let's go on to our next point, which is don't touch your device when conversing. Again, I know. I love the feel of my iPhone in my hands,
dudes. Yeah,
yeah. So it's probably like moving my thumbs over it as I'm talking to somebody is just probably not terribly effective. I'm just guessing. I don't know. You may have
just guessing. Yeah. So look, we know that if we're sending a text or we're doing something textual on the phone and somebody interrupts, we stop and we put our phone or device away. But what about when the conversation with a live person comes first, right? We're talking to someone face to face or on the phone, or you're in a meeting, because that's a large multi-phase conversation if you can tolerate that description of it. And our mobile device chimes its Pavlovian chime, right? What do you do? By the way, when I checked the spelling of Pavlovian, I didn't realize it was early 1900s. Pavlov won the Nobel Prize for medicine for his work on behavioral conditioning. Very interesting. Anyway,
yeah.
If you don't know who Pavlov is, folks, he's the one that taught dogs, he ring a bell and then the dogs got food. And then over time, he learned the dogs salivated when they heard the bell because they believed the bell was going to precede food. Even if he didn't give them food, ring the bell and the dog salivates. And I think there are parts of our brains, those of us who use gadgets to communicate, when the bell rings, when the device buzzes, we go into, oh, somebody wants to talk to me. And that's a form of mental salivation. So look, under the circumstances, you're talking to somebody and the bell chimes. You might say there are three approaches to this situation. You can either A, ignore it, B, immediately action it, or C, look at it and decide on its importance or urgency relative to what you're doing at the time, and then action or don't action it based on that. But, conceptually, that makes sense. That's essentially how you could interact with it, right? But in actuality, for better than probably 90% of the professionals we observe, there's really only one standard approach, and that's B, action it immediately. Look, now, I know what you're thinking, right? You're saying, no, that's not true. I look at things and decide in every case. And as an aside, let's now praise the 5% or so, or 10%, who ignore the messages and the emails and action them in time. Bravo. Well done. And we look forward to reporting to you when you get promoted faster than we do, for good reason. But look, for the majority, we've discovered that no, you really don't look and decide. You used to look and decide. That's what you started doing when mobile text comms came crashing down in the world. But soon you discovered there was no sanction for looking, and really for the vast majority of items, it didn't take that long to action it as opposed to just looking. And so now you just action everything immediately. Like we said, choice B. The gradual change of that, interest in staying on top of the wave of messages, our interest in self-efficiency, our interest in avoiding sometimes deep conversations, our interest in appearing busy, has really sort of caused us to slide into a state of perpetual upward motion. And I'm going to get off my soapbox here, but basically we've turned ourselves into running up an escalator, mistakenly believing it's a set of stairs. It doesn't work. You're not going to get more done by being a fabulous texter or emailer on your phone. So our recommendation then is really pretty simple. If you're already engaged in a conversation with one or many, we keep our hands away from our phone. If our device was in our hand when we started, we keep our device out of the view of our eyes. We don't look in the direction of our device. We certainly don't look at it. We're not conversing with it after all. While it's in our hands, we don't fiddle with it and toggle the mute button incessantly to hear it buzz or to feel it buzz. We don't caress the scroll wheel. I mean, I literally see people sitting next to me on planes looking at and just they've got it in their hand while we're talking and they're moving the scroll wheel up and down on their BlackBerry. We don't push the home button to light it up and waste the battery, by the way. We don't clean the screen on our clothes, covering our thigh while we're talking, reminding everyone in the room we have this device in our hand. We don't check the time. Not just because we ought to be wearing a watch and look at that, but because our fellow converser doesn't think for a moment we're checking the time. They think we're checking for mail. Don't touch it. Speak. Listen. Converse.
I'm just thinking about the times I've violated this.
Oh, and by the way, several of those things came from myself. But after a couple of months of practicing differently, I will tell you, it is a notable change and well worth it.
Yeah. And people notice and people feel more connected when you're talking to them. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And folks listening can do that as well. All right. So clearly, though, there's times when there's a time to violate this, right? Under some kind of situation where there's some urgency or some, you're involved in arranging care for a family member of yours, right? Or a family member of yours is lost, or a child has called twice and left no message, or your boss is in meeting and said she needs this information, numbers, for example, right now.
Right.
Certainly there's got to be exceptions, right?
Yeah, sure. Look, we allow that, right? In those cases you mentioned, the sense of urgency rule that we're applying here allows you to consider, and we mean consider, we don't mean throw away our guidance. Consider ignoring these rules briefly in order to address that urgent or potentially important matter which has become urgent, right? But look, here's the problem. I mean, this is, I think I've used the phrase before on air, driving a truck through a loophole, right? People are going to go, oh, well, then good. Then I'm, all I have to do is assume that, everyone assumes that everything I do all the time is super urgent or super important. And so therefore I can violate the rules, right? But this caveat we're talking about does not apply, but maybe once a week at the very most. And even then for only a few minutes. And probably for most of us, it only applies once a month at that, where you can ignore rules 1 and 2. Right? If you find yourself taking advantage of this exception more frequently than once a week at most, or really for most of us once a month, your sense of urgency and self-importance is probably dangerously for your career out of calibration. Don't confuse busyness with efficiency, or efficiency with effectiveness, or effectiveness with urgency, or urgency with importance. We slid all the way down the scale and it doesn't make sense. So yeah, we understand there are rare exceptions and that's okay.
Okay. So help me though, because I buy the fact that whether it's urgent or not, if I sit there and somebody's trying to have a conversation with me and I reach down and I pull up my BlackBerry and I start thumbing the wheel and texting somebody because it's an urgent situation, for example. Okay. Let's just give me that.
Right.
I'm still affecting the relationship, right? They can't distinguish. I mean, we already said this stuff happens all the time, right? So right. They've got to assume like I'm every other joker out there and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not giving precedence to our face-to-face conversation. So how do I handle that? How do I handle the urgent situation without sending the wrong message to folks?
Yeah. It's good. I mean, this is where politeness and social grace, which I'm sure when I say that, a lot of people roll their eyes, but believe me, it makes a difference in your career. This is where a little bit of that goes a long, long way. And what you do is you ask politely to be excused in order to address that urgent moment, that urgent situation, that important request. Don't rely on the self-appointed importance that allows anything you do to trump anything else somebody else might ask you to do. And that's essentially what everybody does now, and it's not effective. When you're in one of those rare urgent situations, and you're interrupted while sending a mobile text, you politely say, would you please excuse me for a moment? You look the person in the eye. You don't say, excuse me, and put up your hand. Notice the difference. You look in the eye. In fact, if you really want to be sincere, tilt your head a little bit. Some people may laugh at that, but psychologists say that really works. Tilt your head, look them directly in the eye and say, would you please excuse me for a moment? And when you do so, when you hit the word please, raise your eyebrows a little bit. Okay? You don't tell them what you're doing, right? Because that takes time, and it either implies that you want them to know how bloody important the interruption really is, or you're suggesting to them that if you tell them what you're doing, that they're going to be able to compare what they think is more important, their agenda or yours. But if what you're doing really is that important, there ought to be no trumping of it, right? And if you're at all actually confident about asking to be excused, you don't need others to know what you're doing. And again, nothing else could trump that rare situation. Look, you probably don't work in the Palace Elysee or the Conte or 10 Downing Street. Maybe you do, but we suspect you don't, right? If you don't, just politely and discreetly step away, handle the moment after you've asked, would you please excuse me? And come back with a simple, sorry about that, what's up? And if you only do that once every couple of weeks, people will begin to see you within a month or two, or even, let's say 3 months, if you've done it 3 or 4 times in 3 months, say, you're going to begin to be thought as important and as gracious. And frankly, as a little mysterious too, if that helps. Though, to tell you the truth, important and gracious, particularly together, are just about as cool as you can get in the world today. You come across as a very respectful person, not lording your importance over others. And look, no offense, let me say this is Career Tools, and we want everyone listening to have a great career, whether you're in the last 5 years of your career and you've decided you don't want to be retired anymore, or you're retired on active duty, or whether you're 22 and just starting your career. But I want to speak specifically to the young people, the people who are 19, 20, 21, 22, who grew up with these devices and their text messages passed 10,000 in a month. Okay? You're not as cool as you think you are to more senior people in your organization. And this is not a generational thing. This is a new to your career thing. Okay? If you've been in academia all your life and you're 35 and you're starting a professional career, for instance, and you're totally addicted to gadgets and so on, what you're doing is cool perhaps to your friends, but you don't work for your friends. And if you do work at a small company and everybody texts all the time, what would be wrong with being slightly more gracious and slightly more focused on face-to-face conversations than everyone else? So be cautious, be aware. This can be an enormous competitive advantage because, as we've said a million times, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Now, you said at the beginning of this cast, we jokingly, I'm sure, of taking the show notes here and rolling them up and giving them to folks and going around beating people up on the side of the head. But in fact, we probably don't think that's terribly a great way to educate the world.
Fun for a moment, anyway.
Yeah. But what if I got peers, they're not listening to this cast. They're not as interested in improving their career as I am.
Right.
And so what do I do for the folks? I follow this advice, yet my friends and peers, even my boss, continues to exhibit the same behavior. What do I do when they're texting? I walk up and they give me that look over the top of their eyes that says, go away.
They don't think it says go away, right? They're like saying, no, I'm paying attention to you and my text messages too. Right, but actually exactly. What we hear.
Yeah, keep going. I got you.
Yeah, I got you. I can do it. I'm listening. Yeah, I'm listening. Yeah, right. It's easy. What you do is you interrupt, but you do so politely. And you allow them to finish their message. Okay? What you do is you say, do you have a moment? Or got a second? And by the way, those are both questions. You don't say, hey, I need something, or got to talk to you. You ask a question. And one of the things I've noticed with people who are particularly skilled at working with others is they understand the difference between a statement and a question. They don't say, please wait. They say, would you please wait a moment? They don't say, tell me your name again. I kid Davis Statler about this, our good friend who works for Apple. Tell me your name again is a command as opposed to, I'm so sorry, would you please share your name with me again? Or would you please tell me your name again? The difference between a question and a statement, right? We don't start introducing the topic we wish to talk about. Hey, got a second? I need your input on X. You say, do you have a moment? Or do you have a second? The reason why we don't is because we can see that they're busy, for heaven's sake, right? The fact that they're in public makes them generally accessible, right? If they're walking down the hall, then of course you could interrupt them if they're not doing anything, if they're just walking. But the fact that they're busy, they're on the phone, makes them, well, busy, right? The conflicting rules here about, do I interrupt someone who's in public or in a public space at an office, for instance, but busy, the conflicting rules about that suggest that it's okay to interrupt while also recognizing that their task at that moment may hypothetically take precedence over our interruption of them. Now, Career Tools says, no, it probably doesn't if they're texting or emailing, but we're going to be graceful about our interruption, okay? We understand that they may indicate by their response to us that they're too busy, right? And they're probably going to overuse that. They're going to probably act as if they're going to give you that look, right? Head down, but eyes up, saying, go away, right? Okay, fine. They haven't listened to the cast. Fine. The absence of civility or courtesy from another person usually does not permit us to abandon our scruples and our responsibility, if you will, to treat them with respect and dignity. Okay? For once here, let's take the high road and say, I'm going to be nice, and maybe he will be too. And if he's not nice, I'm still going to be nice, and I'll end up having been nice twice, once in the face of adversity when he's rude to me back, and I say, oh, so sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. And that's going to be my consolation prize for not accomplishing the task I was working on. And that's okay. Now, some people are going to say, wait a minute, no, that's not right. If you're telling me that when I'm interrupted, I'm supposed to stop, then surely when I'm the interrupter, I should assume that they should stop as well. Well, why do I have to be tentative?
Exactly. What's fair is fair.
Yeah, right. And the answer is, and I'm sorry, people are going to think I'm some old-fashioned fuddy-duddy, but I've learned this the hard way. And by the way, I've seen this happen among executives where folks, when you go from being a manager to executive, the need for civility and social grace rises by 10-fold to 100-fold. And if you want to become CIO, if you're a technical person, you're sitting out there listening to this cast and thinking we're nuts, let me tell you something. You can probably make manager, you can probably make director, and you can probably get by just by being smart and knowing systems and being clever with budget and having a couple of allies that you can get together and quash opposition to various things you want to do. But you have a shot at CIO, and the senior executives in the C-suite look at you and they don't see you as being socially graceful, as being able to handle yourself. They wonder why your suits don't fit terribly well. They wonder why your car is dirty all the time and you show up late and sort of your hair is wet to work 3 days a week. You're not going to get the job. And they're not going to tell you why. But the reason why is because you don't realize that the job at the top of your organization is all about people. And if you're going to work with people with strong egos, strong drive to win, strong desire to have other people lose sometimes, those high Ds at the top of major organizations, they're going to say you're not capable of surviving at their level. And you're going to wonder why you never make it when you continually prove that you're infinitely more efficient than them. And these social graces actually matter, and they matter more at the top of your career. So the fact is, the reason why these rules overlap and we're willing to be more gracious than perhaps what we would expect them to do, right, is because civility is not just obeying the rules. It's behaving in a way so that if the rules are not followed by somebody else, one can still gracefully recover and not be uncivil about it. Look, at the top of your organization, the rules of professional comportment really rely a great deal on politeness and on etiquette. I know. There's somebody listening who's working at a small startup, a technical startup somewhere, and they're saying, yeah, not at the top of my company. So yeah, okay, at the top of your vendor companies or the top of your client companies, that actually is true. And sometimes, hopefully, you want to be bigger, and you're not going to be bigger by getting away with being a cad to people all the time. Those guidelines are written to allow a little bit of space, of breathing room between two people interacting. Basically, it's I behave appropriately so that even if you don't in response, everything is still okay. The guidance for one person's behavior allows for the other person's incivility. If it didn't, the rules would become impossibly rigid and confining, that if I behave appropriately, you have to do exactly what I say, which human beings just don't do that way. My behavior, my niceness, my politeness, my appropriateness, my respect for you, shown by my civility and the way I politely interrupt you rather than brusquely doing so, neither requires nor compels you to behave, but on its own, it stands by itself. It doesn't need an appropriate response to validate it. If I'm civil to you and polite to you, the fact that you're impolite doesn't change the fact that I was polite. If I'm right and you're wrong, then I'm still right. And look, if you're the shoe were on the other foot and you're the one texting and somebody interrupts you, you know you're supposed to stop. But doesn't it make it easier for you to stop if the person who's interrupting you does so with a bit of deference? Isn't it easier to stop for someone who is polite about it, all things being equal, than it is for somebody who's brusque? Look, let's do the right thing, not because of what it gets us, That's not doing the right thing. That's doing the clever thing. Okay? And frankly, it relies on the other person. And frankly, you never know about that other guy. Let's do the right thing just because it's the right thing. So interject politely and hope they respond politely in return. And if you're the one on your phone, stop texting and hope others do that in return for you. And, okay. Is it impossible what we're suggesting? No. Is it unlikely for magically this wave to sweep across the world in the next 2 weeks? Yeah, it is for today. But again, you can be the person that says, no, I want to be better and I want to be more effective. And maybe I'll become a manager and then I'll train my directs to do that. And when I get promoted again, I'll train their directs to do it. And when I get promoted again, my entire division will do it. And pretty soon you'll have a culture which is about respect and not about efficiency.
There you go. Be the change you want to be in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was looking for something like that. And that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah. So wrapping up briefly, the common practice of texting and talking and calling all in parallel and serial form is, sorry folks, rude and inefficient, ineffective. It's often perilous. It's completely unnecessary. Stop behaving that way. Change the way you're using your device. Put face-to-face conversations before electronica. Put your device away when you're addressed. Don't touch your device when you're conversing. There are rare times when urgency trumps our recommendations, but when you do that, ask to be excused politely. And when you are interrupting somebody who is on their phone, interrupt politely.
Excellent. All right, my friend. Thanks.
Thanks, partner.
We'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. That's it. We'll see you all again next week. Meantime, have a great one. So long.